Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I promised in another video I did this morning that I would discuss a little bit of why I don't really like to get into endorsing other channels, and a lot of it has to do with people's black and white thinking and the hyperbole that they use on the internet. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this has come up a lot lately between the Athlean-X and AlphaDestiny stuff. Like, I get a lot of people who are like, what do you think of AlphaDestiny's channel? What do you think of his overall message? And that's really an absurd question. It's an absurd question, and here's why. There is no YouTube channel out there in the strength and fitness world that I'm probably going to spend enough time to look at the entirety of their material. There's no way I can give a fair approximation of it because I'm too busy working on my own research to put out content. I'm too busy making anywhere between 5 and 9 videos every day between my different channels for me to sit around really watching a lot of fitness channels, because truth is, I don't really get information from people who aren't strength and conditioning coaches anymore. I've spent the entirety of my time as far as this goes, as far as my learning, talking to various coaches and athletes around the world for the last 2 decades. Researching, reading, trying to compare the results of different athletes I've seen, the methods they use, talking to a lot of their coaches, whether it's online or in person, because I met a lot of really good coaches when I was living over in Europe. I mean, I met some awesome coaches from the United Kingdom, from Sweden, from some of these other places who really have a lot of fantastic ideas on training. People who've worked with real athletes. Talking to different strength and conditioning coaches in different endeavors and watching how people respond to training, and then looking at all the scientific literature to find the differences. And truth be told, I don't really spend a lot of time looking at the material of people who are doing anecdote, because we're at a point now to where there's so many decades of knowledge of exercise science and programming for it. It's been done around the world by coaches who've had different countries throw millions and millions of dollars into their research, like the Russians did and the Americans did and everything during the Cold War, that working with anecdote at this point is really kind of a waste of time. I mean, you can occasionally step back and look at anecdote, but there's so much data to look at and material from stuff that's been tried and tested for decades and generations on various strength athletes. And that includes even gaining muscle mass, because weight classes and things are an important part of that. Even body composition as far as these athletes go. There's so much there that I don't waste time with a lot of anecdotes. And the problem is, how do you fairly assess the information of a given channel without looking at the entirety of their material? So someone says, well, what do you think of this channel? The only fair answer for me to give, unless I'm going to address a specific video someone links, and I do that sometimes. I did that the other day with the Athlean-X video, which caused an enormous shitstorm with his fanboys. And I'll get to that in a minute, but that's the problem. Unless I'm addressing a specific video and a specific set of points, how do you interpret another channel? I mean, how does someone come to my channel and give a fair assessment of my information? I have 2,600 videos. It's totally unfair to ask someone to honestly assess my channel. How are they going to do that unless they spend an entire week watching my shit 24 hours around the clock? And it's people will get a limited perspective of your channel. For example, people will come to my channel if they only looked at the drama videos, which are about 5% of my videos. They would think my video is all about shit talking people and accusing them of drug use. But if someone were to look at another playlist of mine, they would assume the only thing I give a fuck about is deadlifts and linear periodization. And the latter is probably a fair assessment. I think that deadlift is the greatest exercise of all time. That would be a fair assessment of my channel as far as what I'm all about. But, I would look at another channel and I would be like, well, if you watch their channel and you watch my channel, you probably know more about what we both teach than I do. You're more qualified to make a valid comparison than I am, and I would say, and would be fair, and you know what? Any of these channels, if they were to give a fair assessment of me, would say the exact same thing in reverse. Because you know what? All of us who read, research, do our thing, observe stuff in the real world, look at scientific studies, we all think that we've got it pretty close to right. Is that fair? I mean, if we're teaching it to other people, we think we've got it pretty close. Maybe not perfect, but we're real close. That's what we all believe, or we wouldn't be teaching it unless we're just being a con man. So if you were to ask me, what do you think of this guy's information? I would just say whatever he agrees with me on, he's right on, and whatever he disagrees with me on, he might be wrong, depending upon the context in which he's putting it, because he might be right in his context. All right, he might actually be right because we're not looking at the question in the same contextual manner, or the training method or the diet method in the same context and set of goals. And that's an important point. And I thought that was interesting that, like when I mentioned Jeff stuff, I gave credit where credit was due in Athlean-X's video. Jeff, I know Jeff is his first name. I gave a fair assessment because people were like, really, I didn't like this video. Will you look at it? I think he gave some bad information. Yeah, he gave some bad information. Some people even said that they felt it was different from his normal video, that he was talking bullshit that he doesn't normally talk about in there. So I don't know what was going on there because I don't watch his channel. But the point is, I was critical of the bad information and I gave praise for the good information. That's trying to be fair. But, then his fanboys will come in and say, well, he looks better than you, or you should be taking his advice, and be like, this video was about gaining muscle mass. Now, the reality is, if someone's into the ripped physique thing, obviously they think Jeff looks better than me. Jeff is a fuck ton leaner than I am. All right, is that a fair assessment? I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. Jeff has dramatically less body fat than I do. We can argue whether that's a good thing or not, but that's stating a fact. That is a provable fact. He is much leaner than me. I am a fuck ton bigger and a fuck ton stronger than Jeff. Also a provable, verifiable fact. And what do I mean? I mean, if you liposuction 30 pounds of fat off of me, I would probably have 30 pounds on the guy still. I probably have 20 or 30 pounds of muscle on the guy. That's a fair assessment. People are saying, well, he's strong. Well, at his age, that's awesome. We're like the same age, guys. He's 41, I think. People said he's 41, I'm 40. Pretty close to the same age. They're like, well, he deadlifts 500. You guys watched me not long ago rep out 7 reps of 500 pounds, no belt, no straps, wearing 1-inch heel boots with all clean reps. You guys have seen me, do 535 for 5 reps? They're like, well, he squats 315 for reps. I'm like, you guys have seen me squat over 500 pounds with a belt, no wraps. I've also done beltless 465 for 3 with a 1-count pause at the bottom ass to grass. I'm stronger than him. I'm bigger than him. But you know what? That's not the point. Whoever's stronger or bigger still doesn't prove the knowledge of the other. He's also leaner than me. Maybe his diet advice might be more on point if your goal is to get ripped and stay ripped year-round. The guy probably has some pretty good fucking advice for getting ripped. And I think that's a fair statement. But that's about different goals. Not everyone's goal is to be ripped. Not everyone's goal is to be as big and as strong as they can get injury-free. Now, both of us seem to be, people are saying we're both big on injury-free training. I can appreciate that. I'm very big on prehab work. I'm very big on injury prevention. I'm very big on balancing different stabilizing muscles and opposing muscles in order to prevent injuries. I'm very big on connective tissue and joint health. But I'm also big on getting big and strong and explosive, and that's my goals. And if that comes at the expense of me carrying a little more padding, then so be it. I don't care, because you know what? I love to eat. Jeff probably doesn't like to eat. In fact, I would say that's fair. If anyone's at the body fat he's at year-round, they have to be doing something to keep their appetite in check. Or they're a classic under-eater. And you know what? That's okay, because some people have those goals. People have different goals, and that's okay. Not everyone cares about aesthetics. Not everyone cares about being shredded, but also not everyone cares about being big and strong. Not everyone cares about explosiveness or athletic performance. So these comes down to different goals, and here's the problem. When we start talking about these things, people are only right or wrong inside the context of their specific goals. Maybe I have a piece of advice that I'm right about for one person's goals, but that Jeff's right about for another person's goals. AlphaDestiny is right about for another person's goals. Steve Shaw is right for another person's goals. That's the problem, is that when you have to look at this different information, you have to assess that specific piece of information inside the context of someone's goals. And maybe a channel gives advice that you can only use 50 or 60% of their information because the rest of it is going to be contrary to what your specific goals are. So when we start analyzing it from that perspective, who's right or wrong, it's entirely context dependent. It's entirely context dependent. But when it comes to basic things like gaining muscle, gaining strength, or even losing fat, those are oftentimes pretty straightforward. Those can oftentimes be determined as right or wrong answers, but different people have different goals as far as the combination of those things. All right, and sometimes advice has to be within the context of those goals. And it's not about someone being right or wrong as some sort of absolute. But again, ultimately the problem you have is that when you do criticize another channel, all people hear is, he's fucking wrong. He's wrong, and you're saying all his advice is shit and that all your advice is better than his. That's what you're saying. That's what people hear when you are critical of another channel. And what people also hear when you give props to another channel, and I've had this happen several times. I've had this happen with YouTube channels. I've had this happen with coaches. I saw a single piece of advice they gave, and I said, that's some awesome fucking advice. I'm going to give props for that. What happens? People then flood in and tell you about everything that you disagree with them on. And they're like, well, you said he's a good channel. He gave good advice, but I found this and he disagrees with you. So you're a fucking liar. Or one of you guys has to be wrong because you disagree. You said he's a good channel. Explain to me why you guys disagree on the best rep range to get the best explosive speed on the power clean. Because you said he had good advice on adding bananas post-workout for calories. And that's how people do. They can't accept the fact that you can take a specific piece of advice and look at it in the context in which it's given without it being either a personal attack or a personal endorsement of a person's entirety of their work or their value or their character. That people can't seem to detach information and the value of that information itself in the context in which it's given without it being personal about that person. And that's the same token too, is that when you are critical of someone else's specific piece of advice, people take that as a personal attack on them. And if they like that person, they then come at you with personal attacks on you that literally have nothing to do with the advice. And that's the perfect example of the Jeff Cavalier thing of all they talked about was how much more ripped he is than me when our topic was gaining muscle. The entirety of the information was about gaining muscle effectively. That has literally nothing to do with losing body fat or being ripped. Those are two totally separate things. But that's all it became about to those people. Because people will then want to find whatever they can to where they see you is not as good as that person you're criticizing the specific piece of advice on. Instead of just looking at the information objectively, people seem to need to make it personal. And everything has to be black or white. Everything seems to have to be in extremes for people on the internet. And they can't just take advice at face value. At least some people can't. And that's the biggest problem you run into when you either endorse or criticize a piece of information from another channel. And so when people ask me to what do I think of a channel or a person in its entirety, I don't address that because that's not a fair question. It isn't fair for me to address an entire channel based upon little snippets of information unless their advice is so fucking bad that like they give 3 pieces of advice that I see in the only 3 videos I've seen of theirs that are so far off the mark and scientifically disprovable or causes injury that then I might say, okay, this whole channel's shit. But if they're giving good advice in there too, I can't give a fair assessment of a whole channel based on that snippet. That's just not reasonable. And if you do, people are going to misinterpret it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.